It's about time we start our bottom line studio discussion right here in our Kenyan studios. And on my right, I have John Gashie, who's the chairman, Article 19, and also regional affairs analyst, a regular contributor to the show. Many thanks for joining us. And then on my far right, we have Professor Elijah Muniz, a lecturer at Chandaria School of Business at USIU Africa. Many thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, now let's just get started. Let me start with you, Gashie. You've seen the development that has been happening in this continent. Theresa May was in South Africa, Nigeria, now she's in Kenya, signing deals, apparently. We're going to talk about those deals shortly. Angela Merkel is in Senegal. She's planning to visit Nigeria, as I've already mentioned. FOCAC is coming up in Beijing. That is the China-Africa Summit. The UK Prime Minister has already talked about the need to have some sort of an African investment summit in the UK.
Yes.
What are you reading in this, on all this development first?
Perhaps that Africa is exciting to a lot of external powers, and that, as somebody just said, that those that will have a foothold in Africa going forward will have an edge in terms of the mineral resources, in terms of the so-called Africa Rising narrative. But there is something perhaps more fundamental, in my view, is that there is perhaps a change in the international trade superstructure and infrastructure, and that a lot of the countries are trying to position themselves to really have a better engagement. Now, when I'm saying better here, for their own advantage. And really, the idea that May or Merkel or even the Chinese are here because they love Africa, from where I stand, doesn't cut. They are only prepositioning themselves. And I think the bigger question is, what will Africa do to take advantage of this new opportunity?
Prof, I'd like to hear your point of view as well. Are you seeing some sort of a scramble for this continent?
Yeah, I think it would be perhaps too much to call it a scramble, but I think the new kid on the block, China, is changing the structure of international relations.
Yes.
And I think what we are seeing, particularly from Europe, from European countries, is a response, is a reaction to that Chinese entry and the inroad that China is making. And the fact that also at the international level you see a discourse where there is credibility of Chinese ideas in Africa. And I think Europe, particularly European countries, but also the United States, are trying to respond to that generally, but also, of course, to cement their own interests and to make sure they're not totally kicked out. Just to give two examples, if you think about what Trump was highlighting as his main interest, is the loan, the road that they have given us. So in a sense, and he said something interesting, they want to make it an example. So you can see that the Chinese road contracts or road share of road construction has really grown up. So America is hoping, the United States is hoping, of course, to cut into that. The other thing, which is very lucrative, is government loans. And I think that is something that the Europeans and the United States would like to come in. So Prof, I think Africa is a market, and
Prof,
it's being shared.
We're going to talk about loans shortly. I understand there's a member of parliament actually today who is planning to come up with a piece of legislation to give us some sort of a ceiling when it comes to loan, because our debt now stands at about 4.5 trillion Kenyan shillings. Before we cross over to some of the previous leaders who visited Kenya before and some of the goodies that they've brought to Kenya.
Yes.
Gashie, let's talk about, actually they're there on our screens, Japan. Let's have it again, please. Japan extended grant aid for economic, social development a while back, and they also expressed willingness to support Kenya. I think we have some more. Okay, actually we'll just continue running some of the pictures of these leaders who visited Kenya before. So, is the UK or perhaps the West a bit late to the party? Because, if you look at the trade volumes, China has taken a lion's share, as much as they're yet to be tops when it comes to foreign direct investment in Kenya.
Yes, perhaps for a long time, I would say that the Western world, and in particular Europe and America, were fairly so to speak, satisfied being within their corner, and that the international world economic order, financial order, and trade was there for, shall I say, in their favor. But as Prof is saying here, when then the new kid on the block, China, came in and read the situation fairly well and took advantage of that, then the whole game plan is perhaps need to be changed. Now, we must understand that for Europe claimed, and which is true, they had long-standing relationship with Africa because of the colonial and post-colonial world economic order. And that, for example, the France in particular still has a fairly strong hold on its ex-colonies with deals that were signed prior to independence that made it almost virtually impossible for non-French companies to really get an entry into Senegal or, for example, Cote d'Ivoire. But with the new kid on the block, then the power dynamics have changed, and I think for Britain and even for Germany, now they have to reassign, review, and recalibrate their trade relations. And for May specifically, if you notice, she's been to three very key African countries. One, of course, the largest,
very strategic,
the largest economy in Africa, that is Nigeria.
Yes.
The most sophisticated economy in Africa, that is South Africa. And then there is something else a lot of people usually tend to miss. The most successful non-mineral based economy in Africa, Kenya.
Interesting.
Did you understand?
Yes, yes.
So and now when you're talking about the most sophisticated economy in South Africa, Africa's largest economy, Nigeria, and Africa's most sophisticated and largest economy outside energy and mineral wealth, Kenya, and then they all have something in share. And when you look at that, May is trying to reassert, so to speak, to take advantage of their long-term relationship, and it's a very calculated.
Clearly she's been very strategic. Now, Prof, it seems these foreigners who are coming to Kenya and by extension Africa, very strategic from Geshia's point of view. What do you think our leaders need to do as well to make sure that they get an equal share from the table? And the most important thing, the deals that they're signing, how best will it trickle down to the people on the ground? Because, most speculators or most critics say that, as much as these leaders are busy signing, multi-billion deals with these foreign countries, little gets to the people on the ground.
Before I comment on what I think they should be doing, let's also say the way we talk, we tend to generalize. Maybe the UK is late to the party, just going back to your past question, but it's not all European countries. Actually, interestingly, the quiet man in Africa is France. France has not been quiet. France has now grown to become Kenya's second to China, for example, in terms of government debt. So we all know about China, but actually the person giving us a lot of money lately is France. France has become one of the biggest investors. So the UK is late to the party, but some other countries, France particularly, and Netherlands and Sweden, have had major investments in the last 5 years. Even the small Scandinavian countries, in terms of the amount of investment in terms of energy, it's been huge. But France is interesting to point out because of how massive they are, and because this is not what used to be traditionally the Francophone area, but they are massive. They're massive in Kenya.
They're spreading their wings.
They're spreading their wings. In the next 5 years, it's estimated that they'll invest $10 billion. Now, considering that our annual investment is something like, I think this year last year was about 600 million, not even a billion. 10 billion is a huge amount, and the French companies, Carrefour and others, Decathlon, they are coming in a big way. So I think the UK partly is trying to respond to it having been sleeping a bit, and German and other continental Europeans have been coming in. Regarding what they can do, I think as my colleague Kashia said, we've got a big opportunity, and it's a short spell that doesn't last forever. Now, if you look at what is happening in terms of global investment, particularly in Africa, some of the biggest investment locations are non-oil, non-extractive industry.
Yeah.
I think that is something we need to capitalize on. A lot of the interest of UK companies and European companies and actually American companies is in financial technology companies. Now, that is something we need to leverage, and Kenya has been a leader in that. So, for instance, if we've got M-Pesa patented properly and sold in Europe and American markets, I mean, M-Pesa is a commodity and service that actually can sustain this. This can become our very own Coca-Cola.
Yes.
Very easily. And let it be called M-Pesa, even in the US and in Europe.
It's our own innovation.
In our own innovation.
Let me. As you're going to conclude that shortly. Let me engage Gashia for now. And let's face it. For the last 31 years, we've never seen a single prime minister from the UK visit Kenya.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Theresa May, I think the last time was during Margaret Thatcher's time.
I covered that.
You covered that, interestingly.
Yes, I covered
so let's face it. It's because of Brexit. Of course, there are pundits out there saying that she's here because she feels like the UK is going to lose out of the European Union in terms of trade. So, what do you think Kenya should do to make sure that we get an advantage with regards to the situation that UK is in at the moment?
Yes, I am hoping, and I'm hoping that the negotiation, because Theresa May's visit to Kenya is just the beginning. Perhaps there will be a lot more engagement. And remember that Kenya and Britain have a lot in common in many ways due to our colonial past. But perhaps in terms of taking advantage of this opportunity, you would like to imagine, certainly, that the Kenyan negotiators, the Kenya government, now and even post Uhuru, will take advantage of this window to review one, the bilateral trade patterns, and also two, from where I stand, is to review the direct inflow of investments. But perhaps also we needed to figure out how to address long-standing issues with the UK, and those are the security arrangements that we do have. Kenya still has security arrangements with Britain and the US, and they needed to be revised, reviewed, and to what benefit? If you understand, Prime Minister May will still right now has another function within the British training, the military, and Kenya relationship on security, terrorism, and what have you. We needed to have a look at that.
We're going to talk about security with regards to AMISOM, especially if they have an exit strategy or what. Professor, there's something you wanted to mention?
I just wanted to add. One of our biggest exports is tea.
Yes.
One of our biggest consumers is the UK. As a matter of immediate concern now, once the UK leaves Brexit, we need to have a bilateral trade deal that is going to ensure that we don't revert to the WTO rates.
Yes.
So UK previously has been covered under the EU, but it's exiting now. We have an FTA, a free trade agreement with the EPA. We have the EPAs with the EU. We've sorted the EU side, but once UK goes out, we are likely to have higher tariffs for our tea because we'll revert to the WTO tariffs. So I think in the next 1-2 years, we are going to have to negotiate a free trade agreement with the United Kingdom. So I think that is of immediate importance.
And Gashi, I'm sure you've observed the questioning and everything. Nobody talks about the ban of Mira in the United Kingdom. This is a sector that the president himself gave out he dished out about 1 billion Kenyan shillings.
Yes.
And interestingly, Theresa May, of course, she is the UK's Prime Minister, she went against the government's official drugs advisory because, according to them, nicotine actually causes more deaths than the khat, as they normally refer to it.
Yes. Yeah, I think we say that's a very interesting question, and I think it has a lot of political, local political dynamics. And I think perhaps Kenya could use this opportunity to review and relook at that. And I think, as my colleague said, tea, but also we have something else, the cut flower industry, the horticulture. And perhaps also what we have is the intellectual property laws that exist that govern in terms of technology, because the next frontier in the world, really, countries will develop on knowledge retention, technological advances, and Kenya is fairly well poised and fairly well, in terms of having the capacity to move forward. Now, the mirror question, I think, and I was hoping that possibly Uhuru and May would be able to have this on a sideshow and look at it afresh. I think it is something that needs to be addressed. But again, I'm not so sure whether this will be either on a standalone or part of the larger agricultural
I hope they raised it. I'm sure members of parliament and people from Nero are watching. Now, Prof, as we conclude, there are two things that came out from the press briefing. One, Theresa May talked about the need to have long-term investment in Africa and move away from the aid kind of model when it comes to the relationship to this continent. And President Uhuru Kenyatta talked about corruption, saying that there will be no turning back on corruption. I'm sure these are two things that are, symbiotically kind of related. As much as she's promising us more investment, there's need to curb corruption locally.
Yes. Particularly the UK and US. I think two of the corruption scandals we had in the last 1 year related to direct ODA money, aid money given for health and things like that. So there's no point of giving aid if we are not also using it properly. But as for saying that we need long-term, I think that's sort of anachronistic. People have been saying that. I don't think that's new. Clearly, I think the Chinese have turned that discourse into a normal thing. Yeah, we do need investment. And countries like Netherlands have actually stopped their ODA. So Kenya now is a low middle income country. So we have to learn to anticipate that ODA aid is going to be less and less. But I think for us, we are well posed. Our budget is well catered for through the national revenue. So it's a node statement to say that we should concentrate on investment.
Just Geshe, let me give you the last word. You have just a minute. I mean, bottom line, it seems like, the future looks bright for Africa with proper leadership in place, with all these interests coming in, left, right, and center.
Yes, we were saying with my colleague that possibly there is a courting dance that is going on for the international community trying to court this new girl on the block. It's called Africa. The bigger question is how well this girl, being Africa, will be able to figure out who the suitors and what comes on the table.
And she gets a good deal out of it.
And she gets a good deal that. And I think that's really, this quoting dance, Africa is being quoted by Russia, China, US and Europe. I think we have an opportunity to revise, review and relook at our historical relationship and how we were treated in the past and what can we do to leverage. The key word here is leverage. There is an opportunity, and before this quoting dance comes to an end.
Thanks, John Geshe, for your input. Always a pleasure to have you on the show. John Geshe is the chairman, Article 19, and also regional affairs analyst. And then Professor Elijah Munye, many thanks for your input. He's a lecturer, Chandara School of Business at USIU Africa. That brings us to the end of Bottomline Africa. And this is what we did ask you earlier on the Twitter poll. What issues would you like to see addressed between Kenya and the UK? We've had that press briefing by the two leaders, that is Theresa May and President Uhuru Kenyatta. At Stephen Udwati says unemployment and corruption. At Sir Bramwell Kedi says, Bottomline Africa, I'm watching from Busia. I'm strongly suggesting the two countries find long-term solution to poaching rhino and buffalo horns, a key pandemic. At Fiber Katwitwi says, our military forces need to be strengthened by UK so that they can be able to fight with Al-Shabaab. Then one final one at Patrick Courier says the trade imbalance between the two countries, which favors Britain should do something to ameliorate. Very tough word there. The trade ties by allowing hart from Kenya into the UK market. I think that is something that we've already discussed right here on Bottomline Africa. Many thanks for watching. My name is Yusuf Ibrahim. Be sure to join us here tomorrow, same place, same time. Bye-bye for now. I'll leave you with our proverb of the day as well as the image of the day. Bye-bye.